Welcome everyone to Already Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Tara, and we are going to talk about the Twilight Zone Season 3, Episode 9. It's called Death's Head Revisited, so full spoilers for the episode as always. This one focuses on a former SS captain, Gunther Lutz, who is revisiting the town of his concentration camp where he was the head officer, and essentially reminiscing and I guess remembering the good old days, as he puts it at one point in this episode, only for the ghosts of those he damned to try him and essentially punish him for his crimes, in a manner of speaking. We'll get into what that really means in a minute, but that's the gist of the episode. So Tara, how did you feel about Death's Head Revisited?
I thought it was great.
It's pretty great. This is a super dark episode, and it's a very hard-hitting episode, a very serious topic, which it was actually later on in the episode they actually said this out loud, but I was thinking early on, I kept having to remind myself that it hadn't even been 20 years when this episode came out, because earlier on when the woman, because the opening scenes, he arrives at a hotel and the woman who works there kind of recognizes him because she's worked at this hotel, she's ran this hotel for decades, and she kind of recognizes him and asks him some questions, and he's almost gleeful at the thought of like she's scared of him. He's milking it. He's like, oh,
it's a really good performance from both of them, but especially her in this moment, because she just turns into a victim. During the course of the scene, even though he's been telling her the whole time that he's not who she thinks he is.
Yes, but he's relishing in it anyway, and the way he demands for her to say the name of the town feels especially, because he clearly knows where he is, but he wants to hear it. He wants to hear.
It's just like he's getting this taste of what the power he used to have because somebody is cowering in front of him.
But I was thinking as she was recognizing him, I'm like, oh, you recognizing me, even though he probably looks quite different. And I went, oh, wait a minute, it's not even been 20 years. He wouldn't look that different. It's not been that long, really. In 17 years, as we find out exactly later, when you're, middle-aged, 17 years isn't that much of a difference in your face, compared to like your 15 versus your early 30s, or compared to your late 50s to your early 70s, right? Big changes in those periods of your life. That middle portion, you look pretty similar for the most part, unless something drastically happens to your face. You're in an accident or you decide to get plastic surgery or something. You're looking pretty similar for a long time. And it's something that I've thought about this before in the past with an even like longer time span. Like I've thought this has occurred to me when I've been watching movies that were made in the 80s, and I'm thinking, oh, it was only 40 years. Because to us now it seems nuts, because now World War II and everything we're talking about here to us is 70, 80 years where we're getting close to. It's this weird thing realizing that I'm watching a piece of media that was made so close. It's one of those weird things where I've not seen a lot of war movies that were actually made during or right after the war. I imagine it's kind of weird and kind of surreal, with having no time to reflect and just immediately going, no, we're going to make a thing right now.
I have, and you know what? It's not that they don't acknowledge concentration camps, but they tend to be like POW camps more so, and the Holocaust stuff doesn't really get talked about a lot in the movies that were made at the time. And it's not that it's not acknowledged. I just don't know if it was really talked about in movies at the time. That was more later. And I heard something about how like a lot of people didn't really know much about the Holocaust until like the Holocaust miniseries came out in like the 70s with Meryl Streep, and that's when it became more like a household thing. Like everybody knew about it.
Is I remember you telling me that at some point. I don't know what review it was, some long time ago, about that becoming more well known in the 70s. But it occurred to me when I was watching this episode, because this episode is notably a good chunk before the 70s. It's right at the start of the 60s, and it's tackling these things, and it's not really beating around the bush either.
I think also the two lead actors are Jewish, and they're from like they're I read in the trivia, like one of them, I think the one that plays the prisoner, I think his like all of his European family were like killed from the Holocaust. So it's not like this was a big secret or anything. It's just it wasn't talked about as much.
Yeah, the actor playing the officer, Gunther here, he's definitely someone that I've seen pop up in things because he's got a face.
He was in the Rip Van Winkle caper, also.
Oh, it could just be that. It could just be a previous Twilight Zone. That is entirely possible. I mean, obviously, if there's any complaints about this episode, it's basically just the usual thing with this type of story is that literally everyone is speaking English, and it makes no sense for them to be speaking English. So just acknowledge that. We can move on. It's not a big deal ultimately, but it's something that's worth mentioning. But no, this is pretty hard hitting where. You've got this guy who, because I said this last week when we read ahead to what the premise was, that you've got this guy who, right from the start of the episode, is reminiscing fondly about what he did as an SS officer at a concentration camp and the power that made him feel. He walks into the camp, he goes to visit it, and he looks around, and he has memories of yelling at prisoners. He has memories of, giving death orders. Memories. He goes over to the what do we call it? Where they're hanged. The
hanging area.
No, there's a name for the thing. That doesn't matter. But he goes over there and he's like sort of like leaning against it, and like he's got a smile on his face, and it's like he is easily from scratch, maybe even just in general. But certainly from in your face from the start of the episode, he is easily the most evil lead character we've ever had on an episode of Twilight Zone.
Oh yeah, like he's there to remember the time when he was on top, when he had the power to take lives away and use it and abuse that power, and it made him stronger until the war ended. I think he said in the beginning that he had to he just came from South America or something, where a lot of Nazis apparently would flee to.
Yeah, they mentioned that later on. I think it was in the episode. Because he talks, because this is the thing. It's not even just that he did these things. It's not even just that he reminisces about it. Is we find out that the main ghost that's kind of talking to him throughout the episode and explaining what's happening to him is that he was actually the caretaker who was murdered in a last-ditch effort, basically as the Allied forces were coming towards the camp where it was about to be taken over and it was their time was ending. Mm-hmm. Essentially, our lead character here, Gunther, tried to burn everyone who was left so that no one survived, which is especially just an extra. I mean, it was already evil, but this is like an extra.
Yeah, like the war
vicious,
or this is ending. Like everyone's about to be set free, and yeah, he just tries to murder everyone in his in his wake, and
at least succeeds with one. Succeeds with this main ghost, this Becker character. So it addresses things because the first half of the episode is very much like outside of him reminiscing. It's when the ghost appears, and I say first half. It's not actually really. The ad break's really early in this episode because it's right after the ghost appears where he just says who he is, and that's basically it's ad break time. That was like 8 minutes into the episode. That is a super early ad break in one of these, and then afterwards. We have essentially a debate where Gunther tries to justify and pretend that I was following orders. It was the war. Can we forget about these little mistakes? And quite rightly,
after we've had 15 minutes of him just walking around smiling the whole time, sure, just following orders.
But he's little mistakes. He really calls him on it. And yeah. Probably my favorite part of the episode is where he gets very critical and just says, it's always the same, at the end of the war, it all became, we didn't know this was happening, or we knew it was happening, but we felt powerless to stop it, or, we did do it, but it was orders from someone else. It was never just, I did it, and, no one was taking responsibility for anything. And it felt like, it does feel like this was a very political episode, and probably, I mean, I'm not sure how much of this was completely, in the zeitgeist or the public eye when the episode aired necessarily, but it certainly feels like it was trying to be political and trying to make people aware of just how atrocious, without obviously there's certain they can't show beyond a certain thing here. In fact, I will say one thing that took me out of things slightly a little bit early on, and I'm not saying it has to be more graphic per se, but there's a moment where he's reminiscing early on and he looks over to some hanging bodies, and one of them is very obviously a mannequin or a dummy. and not a real person. And it's one of those things where, like, you're being that sick, you need to see a real person. I'm like, it's not so much that, it's just that if you're going to do the dark visual, if you're going to do this dark thing where he's smiling at this, it being a dummy feels a little bit like a half measure. It feels like, okay, you're trying to invoke the imagery of it, but you're not actually showing me the real horror behind it. So it's a minor critique. I get why. I get that there's, like, the network's like, no, you're not. There's only so much we're going to let. The fact that they let them do this, to be honest, in 1962 or whatever this aired, 1961, is a lot in and of itself.
And I mean, as far as like having a political angle, Rod Serling comes out at the end and just puts it all out on the table. Like, why is this monument still here? It's because we need to remember what happened. We don't want to destroy it. Like, it has this camp is still here because if we erase it, we might erase what happened in history. And
the best part of that ending speech is that he actually changes what he normally says at the end, because normally he'll say, "Oh, this place exists," blah 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 blah, and usually he'll end with some variation of "in the Twilight Zone," or maybe you'll cross paths on this in the Twilight Zone, or he'll always say something like that.
A detour in the Twilight Zone.
At the end of this, he doesn't do that. At the end of this, he says, "Yeah, you'll find this in the Twilight Zone, but also, or more importantly," and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he essentially says, "You'll see it in the Twilight Zone, but more importantly, like, everywhere else too." Like, he emphasizes at the end that this isn't just in the fictional world of the Twilight Zone. Yeah. He makes it very clear that this is a real world thing.
With the Twilight Zone twist of the ghost being able to communicate and torture him.
Well, that's obvious. But I mean, this is the thing. He doesn't even need to do that at the end, but it's a subtle touch that I like that he did. Like, he did change his little speech at the end to just flip it and say, and just in case there's any misunderstanding, that's not bullshit about this. This is not just an episode of Twilight Zone. This is important, and you need to remember this.
There's no supernatural monster here. The monsters are us. We did this to ourselves.
So it's very bold. It's very direct in what it's saying and what it's doing. I mean, the actual plot of the episode is that the ghost says, "Oh, you have to have a trial," and he sees a lot of other ghosts of the people that he killed. He screams as they're reading out the charges. He's starting to go kind of insane. But I want to talk about the filmmaking here in this scene a little bit, because Twilight Zone, of course, and it does this episode as well. At the start of the episode, there's a few key, like, themes that it always brings back. There's like a creepy theme that plays in Twilight Zone. There's like a more somber theme, whatever. And there is the sort of the creepier suspense one at the start of this, and it's when the woman at the hotel is sort of asking his name and starting to realize, and he's looking up at her kind of suspiciously, and it's that sort of like the plucking strings that sort of starts slowly and then kind of builds into a bit of music. I thought it was very notable that they chose again to revere the subject they're tackling here with sort of a deft touch, and because it's a serious subject and because they are dealing with something that's a bit more real, despite the fact that they're obviously having this ghostly element. Although I think it's debatable by the end of the episode if there's any actual ghost going on, if it's all just in his head. But we'll get to that in a second. But when you see the room full of ghosts, like you see the bunk beds and all that, but you see this room full of the people that have died at this camp, and the camera just pans around the room and lands on our main ghost, that is dead silent. There's not a sound effect. There's not a bit of music. It is dead silent. It is just eerie. This is the faces, and it's very striking in a way that, Twilight Zone often will have episodes that have nice flares of style. And we point them out when we get to them. Whether it's obviously Eye of the Beholder is like one of the most big examples that we've had so far, but there's other ones, and then there's other episodes where the writing's really great, but the direction itself is just kind of by the numbers, doing what it's doing. I think this is a case where they went above and beyond with the direction to really sell the just to sell the actual grief of what this is, and to sell the impact of the real history that was at play here.
Did you kind of get Hitchcock vibes from it?
Hitchcock vibes from which in particular?
From like from the way it was shot, and I don't know. It was kind of giving me vibes of early Hitchcock work, but I don't know. You're more of an expert on that than me.
I don't know if I noticed that specifically. That doesn't mean it wasn't there, though.
Yeah, I don't know anything in particular. Maybe it's just the overall tone of it was like successfully unnerving and creepy.
Yeah.
And full of weight, what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's after this scene where he's going to be tried, and he's actually outside again, and the main ghost is talking to him, and basically says that they sentence him because part of me was thinking this episode was going to end with him hanging. They were going to find his body hanging, as if revenge had been sought. I think it was actually far more poignant that that's not what the ending was, because that would have maybe put it straight into supernatural ghostly territory. I think the ending, the point is that he has to live with what he did, and that even though it doesn't seem like he's guilty throughout most of the episode, the idea that finally this is catching up to him, and the impact of what he did is weighing on him, and that's what makes him go insane. If you're going to read this as there's no actual supernatural, this is all in his head, there's no ghost getting revenge, that's not really what's happening. It's all about the doctor and the policeman or whoever it is at the end finding him lying there shivering and like taking him off, and it's the doctor who says, why is this place still standing, and then that leads to Rod's speech at the end of the episode. But
yeah, his punishment is basically to live through the executions that he's given everybody else. Like, he feels the bullets, he feels the hanging, he feels the doctors doing experiments on him, or I assume also they mentioned earlier gas chamber, but they didn't mention it during his like punishment time. But I thought that's how he was gonna like die at the end. He was gonna get gas chambered, but he was not. But like that's it. Like, the doctor's like, he says he's in pain, but there's no marks or bruises or anything to indicate that he should be in pain.
Yeah, again, it's not literal. He's not actually experiencing any of this. It's just he feels that he is. So the idea it's insanity is kind of the point. And I think if he had actually been killed, if he actually did get led to a gas chamber, or he did get hanged, I feel like that's not an episode of Twilight Zone. That's an episode of Tales from the Crypt. In fact, there might even be a Tales from the Crypt. It's been a while now since I watched them, but it sounds like an episode that might have existed.
Episode is remade in another one of the later Twilight Zones. I'm not sure which one, but I think there is like a more famous one that basically does this story again.
Because I feel like that's Tales from the Crypt thing is the more grisly ending, where they actually get the physical like murder or death of someone, right? I mean, Tales from the Crypt in general, almost every story in that show is about someone getting their comeuppance, right? Whereas here, that's not necessarily the Twilight Zone's thing. Some episodes kind of fall into that, but for the most part, this is a lot more varied in the points that it's trying to make and what it's doing. And I think you could argue this episode in a lot of ways is as much of a PSA as it is a piece of storytelling. And I think the storytelling works very well despite that, because I think there's a bit to analyze here about, okay, why does this man remember this fondly? Why did he feel powerful? And or not so much why is he attracted to that? I mean, I guess it's obvious why someone's attracted to feeling powerful, but maybe
why are these the good old days to him when they were clearly a horrible time in our history?
Or more so, what I'm trying to say though is that why were people seduced by this? Why did he become this? It's because of this feeling of power. It's because he felt like he was in charge of others, and he maybe that's something he never felt before, and then he was given this position of power and he relished in it. He became good at it, and right from this opening scene, you get who he is. It treats him with a sense of dread that I don't think even the most villainous of villainy. I mean, it goes back to us saying that he's easily the most evil character we've ever had, or evil protagonist. I mean, I say evil protagonist, he might be the most evil character flat out that we've ever had, and we've had basically Satan himself on like an episode of this. But that's the thing, this comes across as more evil because it's a real evil. This is a representation of people that actually existed and did things in recent history, so it feels more real than... It's one thing to say, hey, we had Satan himself and he was pretending to be a man and he's going to wreak chaos in the world. But that's never actually happened. This happened, and when this episode came out, this happened less than 2 decades ago. This guy was doing this to innocent people, and he was relishing in it. So it treats it with that reverence that I think it needed to. So I was impressed with the episode on that front. I was impressed that immediately I felt like it was treating the subject with the serious touch that it needed.
I think Rod Serling's been on a roll with his episodes that he's written for this season. I'm pretty sure he wrote this one.
He did.
Yeah, and he's had some good ones this season.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing is that the camera does both at the start and the end. There's a couple of really sort of slow pans of the buildings and the various huts at this camp, and I think again the whole point of that is to kind of let you sink in, like, you know, this place, even though this isn't, I don't necessarily think it's the real camp they shot at or a real camp that they went to.
No, but I think the name of the place is a real place.
Oh no, I'm sure it is. I think that's the whole point of the opening, where he makes her say where it is, because the name has reverence and familiar. You know, people recognize that as a. Because I was kind of half expecting it to be Auschwitz, just because it's the one that most people know. But then again,
I mean, that's the one that I know from like history.
Yeah, but then again,
I don't
Tara,
really know any of the others.
But then again, that's the one we all know now. Did everyone know Auschwitz in 1961?
Probably not.
Yeah, was that the commonly known thing in 1961? I don't think it was. So that's maybe our present day, you know, knowledge and brains, or well, I say present day knowledge, our present day, like, you know, what's become the more known parts of the history as infecting how we were looking at that there a little bit. Is there anything else you want to talk about with Ethan, the performances, the direction?
Yeah, I think we've pretty much touched on everything that it's a really powerful episode, and I think the bookends of Rod Serling coming out is really well done as well. Like, a lot of his can be kind of, I don't know, flourishy, Twilight Zone-y, ethereal, but this is very much like today we have a history lesson and everybody needs to sit down and listen.
Yeah, actually, on his opening speech, like, I thought he was dancing around some of the terms, but then, because I thought he was avoiding saying Nazi, but then he said it like 10 seconds later, so so he was still flourishing a little bit in how he said things, because I thought he was speaking around saying particular things, but then he said them anyway. So I think he was just, you know, he was doing his usual, like, I'm not going to just say things straight and to the point. I'm Rod Serling. I'm going to dress up a little bit with some nice plays on words and things. But no, he did. You know, it was bold, and it didn't. It has a purpose. This episode, like any, you know, movie or TV show or any story about a dark period of history. It's always about, let's not, you know, repeat this. Let's remember it so we do not let, you know, people achieve anything like this ever again. So
yeah, don't be seduced by a club that tells you that you're the most important person.
Yes.
You know, beware of cult leaders.
Yeah, it's funny how that seems to work every time, doesn't it? There's always people who love to hear the best.
Right.
But hey, so no, very hard-hitting episode, and great performances. There's a moment in particular, actually, after, because he's yelling during the trial where they're reading out all the charges, but afterwards, when they say they're going to sentence him now, he's been found guilty. He kind of he gets a smile and he starts laughing, like, you're going to punish me? No, I was in charge of you. I'm in charge of you. He has this, and he never says any of this, but it's all in his laugh. He just starts laughing at them. So I think the performance is very good.
I think so too.
Yeah. Obviously not all of the, you know, the accents are necessarily amazing, because I don't think all these actors are German or.
No. I thought for a second like it was going to go like Hogan's Heroes accents, but it wasn't that at all. I mean, it's kind of like the Chernobyl thing where, like, yeah, sure, these guys are all British, but you know where they are. We all know where Chernobyl is. Just let them act so that they can get the performance across. And who cares about the accents?
Yeah.
They're all speaking English, so it doesn't matter if they have accents.
Yeah. I mean, here they do have accents, though.
Yeah, but they're not great.
Yeah. But I'll just say that they are trying to put on some accents in this, as opposed to Chernobyl, where they're just all thick British. Because that's just what they decided to do, because they thought it'd be distracting, and they were probably right. It probably would have been. But so yeah, that is Death's Head Revisited. I think we'll, you know, obviously Rod comes out at the end and tells us about next episode. We're definitely deep into territory that I have not seen, because I have no idea about any of these episodes now. So the next one's called The Midnight Sun. He talks about two women surviving as Earth goes towards the sun, which is interesting because myself and Tara did review a movie called The Day the Earth Caught Fire,
Yep.
which was kind of that premise. We did that on the Atomic Cinema Experiment, our sci-fi movie podcast, and that was an early episode, and it was a very good movie, may I add.
It was.
But that came out in 1963 or 4, so that was just after this, interestingly. But this is the premise here, according to IMDb. When the Earth falls out of orbit, two women try to cope with increasingly oppressive heat in a nearly abandoned city.
Okay.
Okay.
An episode with ladies.
You know what? I'm all for a simple, high-concept premise with a couple of characters.
Thelma and Louise driving the Earth into the sun. Love it.
Yes, I'm sure that's where they're going with it. Yeah, that's called The Midnight Sun, so that is next week's episode. So let us know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Liking is super important, of course. YouTube will recommend us out a bit more with more likes and comments and things like that. Tara, why don't you tell them about Patreon?
Sure. So if you enjoy our reviews, please check out our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/MildFuzzTV. And if you donate as low as $1 per month, you will get access to bonus episodes for other shows we do, including the ACE, the Atomic Cinema Experiment, which we just talked about. And if you donate $5 per month, you will get access to Twilight Zone reviews 1 week early, and some other shows we do 1 week early. So please head over, check it out if you like us. If not, there are other ways to support, like hitting the like button or commenting. Thank you.
Yes, so there you go. That's pretty much us. Get us on Twitter as well, at mild_fuzz for channel updates. But thank you once again. We'll see you next time. Keep watching TV in the Twilight Zone.